My name is not important. What I'm about to tell you is, I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years as a structural engineer, mostly on commercial builds across New South Wales. I own a modest home in the Blue Mountains paid off, mine outright. I drive a 14-year-old Hilux that I refuse to get rid of because it still runs perfectly and I hate waste. I say all that not to brag. I say it so you understand what kind of man I am. Methodical. Patient. I don't panic. And I don't make moves without thinking them through first. Which is why, when my wife of 19 years looked me dead in the eye across the kitchen table and said, "I want the house, the super, and the investment account in the settlement," I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam anything. I didn't even stand up. I just said, "Have a look at the paperwork first. Love." She didn't understand what I meant. Not then. Her solicitor didn't either. They would. Her name is Pauline. We met when I was 43, and she was 38. Second marriage for both of us. I had a daughter from my first marriage, Tess, who was 11 at the time. Pauline had no children, and said she didn't want any, which suited us both. The early years were good. I won't pretend otherwise. We traveled. We entertained. We built a life that looked, from the outside, like something people envied. A nice home. A boat we used maybe 4 times a year. Dinner parties with friends on the deck. She was funny and sharp, and she made me feel, at 43, like I'd gotten a second chance at something I'd squandered the first time around. But something shifts in people. Or maybe it doesn't shift, maybe you just stop not seeing it. By the time I was 58, Pauline had stopped working. She'd been a marketing consultant, reasonably successful, but she wound down her client base over about 2 years, and one day she simply wasn't working anymore. I didn't make a fuss. We could manage on my income. I was a senior project engineer by then. Good salary, and we had the investment account I'd built steadily since my late 30s, a mix of shares and managed funds that had grown quietly and consistently over the decades. The thing I will say, and I want to be careful how I say it because I'm not trying to paint her as a villain in every respect, is that Pauline was never particularly interested in where the money came from. She was very interested in what it could buy. And for a long time, I didn't see the difference as a problem. The boat was hers, really. The renovated kitchen, the European trip twice in 3 years, the constant refreshing of furniture and fittings, these were her ideas. And I went along with them because I thought that's what you did. You provided. You kept the peace. What I didn't do, and what I should have done much earlier, was have an honest conversation with a financial advisor and my own solicitor about where we actually stood as a couple, about what was mine, what was ours, and what the law in this country would say about all of it if things went sideways. I didn't have that conversation until I was 61. And by then, some of it was almost too late. The signs were there. I won't pretend I missed them entirely. A man of 61 who has been around long enough tends to notice when the temperature in his own house changes. She started keeping her phone face down. That was the first thing. Pauline had always been casual about her phone, left it on the bench, charged it on the counter, never gave it a second thought around me. Then 1 month it was always face down, always taken to another room when it rang. I didn't say anything. That's my way. I observe. I collect information quietly. Then there were the lunches. She'd always been social, which I respected. But these lunches became vaguer. Who with? Just a friend. Which friend? You wouldn't know her. Where? Oh, just that Italian place in the village. But she'd come home without that particular look she always had after a good meal, relaxed, a little flushed, wanting to tell me what she ordered. She came home quiet, distracted. I'm not a jealous man. Genuinely. I've never been the type to go through someone's things, but I am an observant man. And what I was observing didn't add up. The conversation that broke it open happened on a Sunday afternoon in autumn. I remember the light through the back windows, that particular late afternoon gold you get in the mountains. I was reading. She came in, sat down across from me, and said she needed to talk. I put the book down. She said she wasn't happy, that she hadn't been happy for a while, that she felt like we'd grown in different directions, and she thought it was best if we separated. I asked her calmly, I want to stress that because I was genuinely calm, whether there was someone else. She said that wasn't relevant, which, in my experience, means yes. I told her I understood. I told her I was sorry she felt that way. I asked her what she was thinking in terms of the practicalities. That's when she told me. The house. My superannuation. The investment account. I've been to see a solicitor, she said. He says I'm entitled to a significant portion of all of it. We've been married 19 years. I stopped working to support the household. I nodded slowly. Have a look at the paperwork first, love, I said. She frowned. What paperwork? You'll see. Now, here's what I need to explain. Because I imagine some of you are already wondering, how? What does the paperwork mean? I'll tell you. But first, I need to go back about 2.5 years to a conversation I had with my younger brother, Owen. Owen is 58, lives down in Canberra, and unlike me, he has an instinct for financial and legal structures that I've always admired. He's not a lawyer, he works in federal public service, but he reads widely, thinks carefully, and he's been through his own divorce. About 15 years ago, which cost him significantly and educated him thoroughly. He came to stay with us for a weekend with me. Really. Since Pauline went to visit her sister that weekend, which was slightly unusual in itself, and we sat up late on the Saturday with a bottle of decent red, and he said something I'll never forget. He said, mate, if you ever have a feeling things are going sideways, the worst thing you can do is nothing. By the time most blokes realize they should have done something, it's 6 months too late. I'd had a feeling for about 3 months by then. Not a certainty. Just a persistent, quiet unease that I couldn't shake. Owen put me onto a financial advisor he'd used in his own situation, a woman in Sydney. Absolutely thorough, no nonsense, with a deep knowledge of family law as it intersects with financial planning. I rang her the following week. What followed were 4 months of careful, entirely legal, properly documented restructuring of my financial position. Let me be clear about this, because it matters. Everything I did was legal. Everything was documented. Everything was done through proper channels with proper professionals. I'm not describing a con. I'm describing what any reasonable person would do if they took their financial future seriously and had the knowledge and the time to act. The investment account, the one I'd built entirely before and during the marriage, with contributions exclusively from my salary, was restructured through a discretionary family trust. The trust was established with my daughter Tess, who is now 30, as co-trustee. Tess is a sensible private person who has never had any conflict with Pauline, but who understood the situation clearly when I explained it. The trust was established and the assets transferred at proper valuation, with all appropriate documentation, through a qualified solicitor. It was not hidden. It was registered. It was, however, structured in a way that meant Pauline's claim on it was significantly more complicated and significantly weaker than if it had remained in my personal name. The superannuation is a separate matter. Under Australian law, superannuation is generally subject to splitting orders in family law proceedings. I couldn't simply remove it. What I could do, on advice, was ensure that the portion accumulated before our marriage was clearly documented and separated in terms of record-keeping, which would be relevant in any property settlement negotiation. The house, our family home, remained in my name. It had been purchased by me before the marriage, using equity from the sale of my previous home and savings from my pre-marriage years. Pauline had never contributed financially to its purchase. She had contributed to its renovation, in the sense that she had selected what she wanted renovated and I had paid for it. A distinction that, I was advised, would be relevant. When Pauline said she wanted the house, what she didn't know was that 18 months prior, I'd had it formally valued and had gifted a 15% interest in it to Tess as an advance on her inheritance again. Legally documented, properly registered, done openly with a conveyancer. Not to defraud anyone. Because it was the right thing to do for my daughter. And because, at 63, estate planning is something you should be doing, regardless. So when Pauline sat across from me that Sunday afternoon and told me what her solicitor said she was entitled to, she was operating on an assumption that our financial position looked the same as it had 5 years ago. It didn't. The months that followed were not pleasant. I want to say that plainly. I know some people tell these stories like it's all strategy and triumph, from start to finish. It wasn't. 19 years is a long time. There were nights I sat in the front room of a unit I was renting in Katoomba because, yes, I moved out, voluntarily, because I didn't want conflict under one roof, and I wondered how I'd gotten here. Not bitterly, just with that particular heaviness that comes from looking at the distance between where you thought you'd end up and where you actually are. My daughter Tess came up one weekend, and we walked the tracks near Lura, and she said, "Dad, you doing okay?" And I told her honestly that I was sad, but I was going to be fine. She held my hand for a bit, which is not something we do usually, and we didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. Owen called every week. Sometimes we talked for an hour, mostly about nothing. The cricket, his garden, what was happening in Canberra. But those calls anchored me. Routine anchors you when everything else is uncertain. My solicitor, a sharp, pragmatic woman in Parramatta, who I will simply call Sandra because she's private about her profile, guided me through every stage of the process. She was clear-eyed and direct, and she never once let me feel sorry for myself during a consultation, which I appreciated enormously. She said to me at our second meeting, "You've done the hard thinking already. Now we just do the paperwork." And that's more or less what it was. The mediation session was where it crystallized for Pauline. The first formal meeting, with both solicitors present. Her solicitor, a confident younger bloke who clearly thought this was going to be straightforward, arrived with a schedule of assets that listed the house at full market value, the investment account at its value as of 2 years ago, and my superannuation in full. He pushed the document across the table. Sandra looked at it briefly. Then she slid our response across. I watched Pauline's face as her solicitor read it. The investment account was now held within the discretionary family trust. Its connection to the marital pool was, at minimum, contestable, and we had 2 years of documentation showing the transfer was conducted properly and at market value, not in anticipation of proceedings. Her solicitor would have known immediately what that meant for their claim. The house, 15% of which was now formally registered to Tess. Pauline could claim on the remaining 85%. But the contribution history made that complex. I had records. Every mortgage payment. Every renovation invoice. Going back to when I bought the place in 2001. Pauline had contributed nothing financially to the property. Her contribution was, as Sandra put it cleanly, domestic in nature, which under Australian family law is acknowledged but weighted. The superannuation, yes, she had a claim. But my pre-marriage contributions were documented in the fund records, and that history formed part of our submission. The quantum she could realistically claim was a fraction of the figure her solicitor had written down. Pauline stared at the document for a long time. Then she looked at me. I didn't smirk. I wasn't smug. I felt, honestly, mostly sad. Sad that we were in a room with solicitors. Sad that 19 years had come to this table with these papers. But I also felt, underneath that, something solid. The feeling a man gets when he knows he's done things right, when he's been careful not because he was being sneaky, but because he was being responsible. Her solicitor asked for a recess. They stepped out. Sandra and I sat quietly. They weren't expecting this, Sandra said. No, I said. They'll recalibrate. They did. And the settlement that eventually came back was significantly different from what Pauline had announced she wanted that Sunday afternoon. She received a property settlement that reflected her actual contributions to the marriage and an acknowledgement of the years she had not been earning. It was fair. I believe genuinely it was fair. But it was not the house, the superannuation in full, and the investment account. She didn't get any of those in the form she'd expected. There was a moment, near the end of the process, when Pauline and I crossed paths at a mutual friend's house, entirely coincidental, and somewhat uncomfortable for everyone present. The others made themselves scarce pretty quickly. She and I ended up standing near the back fence with a glass of wine each. And she said, "You knew, didn't you?" "When I told you," I said. "I'd been careful." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I thought you'd just let it happen. Like you let everything happen." That stung a little, because it was half true. For too many years I had let things happen. I had been passive in a way that I'm not proud of. "I changed," I said. She nodded once. Didn't say anything else. Neither did I. We weren't enemies by then. I don't think I could sustain actual enmity toward anyone. It takes too much energy, and I'm too old. But we were strangers. Two people who had once shared a life and now shared nothing except a few remaining legal signatures to exchange. The divorce was finalized 8 months ago. I'm back in my house now. The one in the Blue Mountains. My house. Mine. Completely. Again. In the fullness of that word. Tess came up for Christmas and we had a quiet one, just the two of us. And she brought a friend and I cooked a leg of lamb, and we sat on the deck in the evening and watched the light go out over the valley. It was, unexpectedly, one of the best Christmases I can remember. Owen came up in January, and we spent 4 days doing not very much. He fixed my gutter. I fixed his attitude about the Australian cricket selectors. We're even. The investment account now properly structured in a way that protects it for the future, including what eventually passes to Tess, has continued to grow. Not dramatically, steadily, which is how I've always preferred things. I'm not writing this to tell you I'm a genius. I'm not. I made every mistake in the first half of this marriage that a man can make. I was passive. I was avoidant. I valued peace over honesty, and I let a dynamic take root in my home that wasn't healthy for either of us. What I did in those last 2.5 years before everything broke open was not cunning. It was simply what I should have been doing all along, paying attention to my own life, taking my responsibilities seriously, and getting proper advice from people who knew more than I did. Let me tell you what I learned, and I say this not as a lecture but as a 63-year-old man who wishes someone had said it to him plainly at 45. Your financial future is your responsibility, not your partner's, not your bank's. Yours. The decisions you make in your 40s or fail to make are the ones you live with in your 60s. That's not cynicism. That's arithmetic. If you are in a long marriage and you have never sat down with an independent financial advisor and a family law solicitor to understand exactly where you stand, do it now. Not because you expect the worst, because you are an adult who takes your future seriously. These conversations are not betrayals of your relationship. They are acts of self-respect. Document everything. Keep records. Not obsessively, not in a way that poisons your daily life, but keep them. Bank statements, property records, contribution, histories. If you built something, keep evidence of how you built it. This is not paranoia. This is the basic practice of a responsible adult. And this is the one that matters most, I think. Stop letting things happen to you. A passive man is not a peaceful man. He's a man postponing a reckoning. And reckonings, when they eventually arrive, are much harder to navigate than the uncomfortable conversations you avoided along the way. I should have talked to Pauline more honestly, years before that Sunday in autumn. I should have said, "This isn't working," not as an accusation but as an observation. I should have asked what she wanted. I should have told her what I wanted. We might have saved ourselves years of slow distance, or we might have ended up at the same table regardless. Some things run their course, but I'd have been less passive, less a man who let things happen, and I think I'd have respected myself more throughout, whatever the outcome. I'm 63. I'm well. I'm home. My daughter rings me on Sunday evenings, which I consider one of the better features of my current life. My brother visits when the mood takes him. I read on the deck in the mornings with a cup of tea and watch the mist come through the trees. It's a small life, in the way that quiet lives look small from the outside. From where I'm sitting, it's everything. The paperwork, in the end, told the truth. It usually does. Make sure yours tells the truth you want told. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Out here on the deck in the mornings, tea going cold while I watch the mist move through the gum trees, I think about cause and effect a lot, not in any grand or mystical sense, just the plain, quiet logic of it. You make certain choices over a long period of time, and those choices, good or poor, eventually show up. They always show up. You don't get to outrun them. For most of my marriage, I made the choice to be passive, to keep the peace rather than speak plainly, to let things drift because confronting them felt harder than tolerating them. That passivity wasn't a neutral act. It was a slow accumulation of avoided moments, and it contributed to the distance that grew between Pauline and me. I'm not placing blame on her alone. That would be dishonest. The state of our marriage at the end was the result of two people making choices across many years. Mine just happened to be mostly the choice to say nothing. What I learned, and this took me longer than it should have, is that intelligence without honesty is just cleverness in disguise. I was a capable man, methodical, professionally competent, financially careful in some respects, but I wasn't honest in my own home. Not about what I needed, not about what I saw, not about where things were heading. And that gap between what I understood and what I was willing to say out loud cost me years I won't get back. The restructuring I did with the trust, with Tess, with Sandra's guidance, that wasn't cleverness either. I want to be clear about that. It was simply what a responsible adult does when he finally stops sleepwalking through his own life and starts paying attention. Owen had tried to tell me years before. Tess, in her quiet way, had been asking questions about my well-being long before things broke open. The people who cared about me were telling me, in various ways, to wake up. I just wasn't ready to hear it until I was. There's a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like sitting down with a financial advisor and asking uncomfortable questions. It looks like picking up the phone to a solicitor when every instinct tells you it's too early, too cautious, too pessimistic. It looks like having the conversation with your daughter that you've been putting off because you didn't want to worry her. These small acts of self-responsibility, they're not dramatic, but they compound over time the same way money does. And when the moment comes, when Pauline's solicitor slid that schedule of assets across the table, I was ready because I had done the quiet work of being ready. I'm not a perfect man. I never will be. But I am, at 63, a more honest one than I was at 50. And I think that's the only direction worth traveling. Toward honesty, toward responsibility, toward the kind of life where the paperwork, when someone finally reads it, reflects who you actually are. That's enough.